Okay, so today we're here. I'm Colleen, president of 43North. We're very, very honored to have Iba here with us today, one of our founders from year 4. Was it, Iba?
Yes, we were one of the winners for 2018.
Right. Iba is no longer in Buffalo, but still, I think, has an appreciation for it. However, she's still in our portfolio and someone we care quite a bit about. So today we're going to hear about her story through high school and kind of what might have led her to find this world of entrepreneurship. So Iba, start with just the basics in terms of where you are now and what does your company do?
All right. Well, firstly, it's great to meet everyone. I'm Iba Masood. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Tara AI. So we are building a very simple project management platform that allows developers, programmers, marketers, just different sorts of people to get together and collaborate in a remote environment. And so in terms of my journey, so I'm originally Pakistani. I was born and raised in the Middle East, so in the UAE. And my parents, in terms of their background, they were both born and raised in India. And so there's kind of a little bit of a melting pot in terms of our family. But for high school for me was definitely a very interesting experience, all the way from being a freshman to graduating. And I think for me, the entrepreneurial bug kind of hit very early. I remember in I think like the first experience I'm remembering was being back in second grade. I used to make jewelry by hand, and then I would just kind of start selling it in class. And then I got into a bit of trouble with the principal, I remember, because obviously I started to they're like, okay, we can't have you hustling students out of hundreds of dollars for these little trinkets. And so I remember trying to diversify my business over time and just create. One of the other things I did was I created comics and just comic books. There's obviously a ton of copyright issues with that, but basically just kind of created comic books from newspaper clippings and articles. And there were these little Archie snippets. And I remember I just kind of create these comic books. And then I thought it was more profitable to rent those out instead of sell them. So, because we didn't actually have a school library in our school. And so there were just kinds of, small entrepreneurial ventures that I kind of got into. And I think that's where the bug kind of started, I guess.
It certainly sounds like it. So take us to high school. You were living where?
So in Dubai. So I was born in Sharjah, which is a smaller city in the UAE. But Dubai at that time, so this is 19. Oh God. So I graduated. So I graduated when I went to college. When I started college, I was 16. So that was 2006. So we're going back to 2002. Was really when I started high school. And so 2002, Dubai was a very different place. It was very different to what you see today in terms of economic progress. It had a very small town feel. My class, I think we were 20 kids. So it was very small classrooms. Just the population was much smaller too. So yeah, going back all the way to 9th grade.
Yeah, and public school, private school, co-ed.
So basically, public schools were only at the time limited to people that were had the nationality. And so we were, just immigrants basically. So I didn't have the nationality there. So I was Pakistani. So the only option really was to go to private school. Yes, it was co-ed.
Got it. So tell us, if you can remember, what did the typical day look like for you? What classes did you take? Were you in clubs or sports or anything after school?
Yeah, so I think one thing it was our school, our high school didn't have resources or a lot of resources, frankly. So we didn't have extracurriculars, which I think I sorely missed. When I went to college, I did pursue quite a few extracurriculars because I was like, oh my God, there's so many clubs to go to and choose from. But in school, there were very little resources. It was strictly lower to middle income in terms of the demographics, and so not any extracurriculars there. But in terms of a typical day, so we'd have we did have PE, so physical education. It was the British system basically. So we were doing our GCSEs and IGCSEs and then O levels, and so we sorry, IGCSEs and O levels, not GCSEs, but basically typical day. So I'd have my favorite class actually was IT. So it was like computer class where we just kind of had started learning just very early basic programming. So Visual Basic and just kind of, learning some of the commands there. And I remember learning about Kanban and Kaizen. Kanban is basically like this manufacturing process that was invented in Japan. And that was like one of my first introductions to productivity, because like TAR is a productivity application. And so like the process of Kanban was basically applied to factory automation and just factory processes, and how you could split up the factory process into different parts, and then the sum of its parts would be greater than the individual parts. And so it was this idea of productivity, lean manufacturing that I think was kind of the startings of the inklings of, and I remember taking my first business courses in like 10th grade and 11th grade. So here it would translate to being a sophomore and junior. And so that was, I think that and biology were my favorite classes. So I was taking biology, physics, and chemistry in my freshman year. That's just because it was required. Like you had to take science track, IT track, as well as different languages. So I was also taking French at the time, and then just some of the basic courses around history, geography, etc.
Got it. And from an entrepreneurial standpoint, were you running any of the businesses like you mentioned in lower grades while you were in high school, or did that kind of go to the wayside?
Yeah, so I remember like the first one was in second grade. From there, I started dabbling in a couple of things, but where I did dabble quite a bit in 9th grade and 10th grade, I remember frankly, like we were pretty lower income, lower middle class. And so I obviously wanted to make some money on the side. So I think in grade 9, I want to say, so 14, 15. Yeah, so I was 14 in 9th grade, and when I was a freshman and in high school. And so one of the ways I used to make money on the side was I started giving computer classes. So I remember I used Microsoft Word to create this like flyer. Basically, I remember it was like using like some Tarzan. Tarzan was like this animated movie by Disney that was pretty popular or famous at the time. So I used that to like create this flyer, and I just kind of posted it in the apartment building where we lived, and it was basically for computer classes. So you could learn how to format your Windows computer. I would also teach typing, like just typing very quickly, and just simple like programs. And I really enjoyed that. The other thing I remember doing was in 10th grade, I created this community online called Potterific. So it was on MSN groups at the time. And I really enjoyed doing that because I think just kind of getting people together online, and it had like 80 members, but that was really fun because I got to meet with like people from all over the world in that community and forum. And I remember like I created these like really hard entrance exams. So you had to take the entrance exam to actually get into the Harry Potter club. Because I was like, true fans only. Like if you're a real Harry Potter fan, then you should know exactly what happened to Neville Longbottom in book 3, chapter 4. So it was just like very specific, and nobody could really pass the entrance exams. But I think these were just kind of like, I'll be frank, like there were no extracurriculars in school, right? And so it was really a lot of the focus was on academics. And so I think like I tried to create some of these extracurriculars on the side, outside, or externally, out of the classroom and out of the syllabus that was there.
Amazing. So I take it you were a pretty good student from an academic standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would come like second or third. I wasn't valedictorian in school. But I remember coming second or third and being really bummed about not being valedictorian. But I think, one of the things I will say is that I think some of these external experiences really enriched my time in high school. And, I'll be completely frank here. Our teachers didn't really recommend it or even, say that you should do these things or suggest it, only because it's not really part of the curriculum. And I think it was, I think now, of course, it's a different story. Like, I think now this kind of discovery process is recommended and is part of the curriculum too, in some cases. But back then it was, just kind of, I really, really enjoyed going online and like kind of joining some of these communities and then creating the community as well, because I think it allowed me to dabble in HTML very early. So I think like dabbling in HTML at that time just kind of allowed me to see, okay, what would the front end design of this Potterific web page look like? And that started the journey of very early, just kind of building web pages. So
amazing, Potterific. So tell us though, Iba, the students that will be watching this will probably be in high school, looking to college, probably a little bit apprehensive to the transition to living alone and going maybe to a new city or walking in somewhere where they don't know anyone. Talk about how you approached college while you were in high school. What was your kind of outlook on it? Were you staying local? Were you going elsewhere? Just talk through kind of what college meant for you and kind of your junior year, senior year, high school self.
Yeah, so I think, junior year, frankly, college wasn't really on the cards or on the table just because of our financial situation. So it did feel odd that I remember in one grade, it was in grade 10, I graduated. That was the one grade I was valedictorian. And everyone obviously was like, oh, what college are you going to? How exciting is it? And it was very difficult to sit amongst my group of friends. Especially some of them were fairly well off. And knowing that I might not actually go to college, or it might not even really be an option. What changed between 10th grade and 11th grade was firstly, I think, from a financial perspective, I obviously started looking into scholarships and learning about, some of the options I had from a financial aid standpoint. And I think, one area, so obviously we decided to stay local. Going international wasn't really an option from a financial standpoint. But I did end up, my college, I ended up going to American University of Sharjah, so AUS. It's the number one university in the Gulf. And so what I did end up doing was, I think one thing was my teachers didn't recommend that I skip grade 12. So what happened was my grades were, or just, where I was in grade 11, I graduated with honors. So in my IGCSEs, which are equivalent to O levels. And so what happened was I had the opportunity or the option to skip grade 12 and basically go to college at 16. So in freshman year. So one of the first things was, college wasn't even an option initially. And then suddenly it became an option. And then when it became an option, then it was like, okay, so could I even, potentially skip grade 12 and go to college at 16? And so that was a huge, I think, mental hurdle. But what really helped was talking to freshmen that were in college that had attended at 18, 17, and even 16. So some students that had, attended college a little bit earlier in freshman year. So one of the things I did was I had to just kind of hustle and find people that were were freshmen. So talking to them really alleviated my concerns, because my teachers told me not to do it. They thought that I wouldn't be able to, that academically it would be too egregious or too difficult, challenging for me to actually enter freshman year at 16. And so what I did was I took the entrance exams, I passed them, and I was able to get into college in freshman year. But I actually think the social aspect was, obviously it's, it's a little bit harder because people there were, 3 years older than me. And so, entering at 16, I think was this whole new world. And let me also go back and state, I had no idea what my major was going to be. I think I feel like it's frankly I still think it's pretty unfair for you to decide at 18 what you want to do for the rest of your life. And I've met so many people. I mean, you can look at, even Bill Gates's history in terms of, the majors that he ended up selecting a college and then, becoming a dropout and eventually. But I think one of the things that is a very difficult decision is to pick your major. And I think what you should gravitate towards is your interest. I feel like what I was gravitating towards was what my parents wanted me to do, which was, business. And I actually ended up changing my major 3 times. Eventually, I graduated with an undergrad in finance. And I did graduate magna cum laude, but I will say this, I ended up working in computer science. So, and in fact, after I graduated, because it was the financial crisis, couldn't find a job and all of that. But I just think that so much of what you're learning kind of culminates into this multidisciplinary process where you take, the learnings you've had in high school as well as in college, and you kind of shape your career. And I feel like having to pick your major so early, it's a difficult decision. But if I have to like even just anecdotally tell you, I think it was 50% of the graduates that I remember from 2010 didn't even end up working in the field that they, selected for themselves in undergrad. So I think there's just so much pressure to pick a major where I think it should be more about, just gravitate towards areas of interest and fields of interest, and especially towards areas that you find yourself going back to in your free time. I think that's what's one key thing that isn't necessarily encouraged, which is where do you gravitate towards yourself from a hobby perspective? And then I think you can find a way to make money out of that hobby over time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Especially these days when we work so much, right? So much is expected of us. To be doing something that we don't care about or don't have even the smallest bit of interest in is where life gets really hard.
Yeah, I mean, our head of product, Cisco, like he majored in anthropology, yet he's doing product management, so and he constantly gives parallels to anthropology and like, just what he's learned in a social science versus how what he's practicing today. And I think, I really think diversity of thought comes from people pursuing different types of majors and different fields. Our lead product manager, Derek, had an undergraduate in biology. So my co-founder and CTO, Sayed, studied mechanical engineering in his undergrad, but he's not, creating cars today. Right. Like he's writing software. So I think, so much of, and I think diversity of thought is really important. Like one thing I've noticed is so many individuals tend to gravitate towards, for example, studying computer science in your undergrad. And I don't think that's necessary to actually pursue a career in computer science, for example. So I think you should really, from a college and even from a high school perspective, pick areas that are of interest to you. I think, for example, people with arts and social sciences degrees can have this, really, I would say, wide palette of thoughts that they can bring to different types of companies, and especially even to tech companies in general. So I'll give you an example, right? When we're creating Tara, one of the things that happens, and what's interesting is that we have a lot of students using Tara as well now, and educational institutions. And basically they're kind of mapping their week-to-week workload. So one of the things that happens is Tara kind of introduces herself to you. And so one of the things we realized was to write the copy of like what she says to you, which is, things like, "Hi, I'm Tara. I'd like to help set up your workspace." So this is like in Slack. It gives specific instructions. For that, you need like, if you have some kind of experience in literature, or even a degree in literature, or some level of copywriting experience, that lends itself really well to creating the copy and the script for what Tara says to you. So I think there's just so many different types of disciplinary careers and fields that will open up and are already opening up. Like I remember when I graduated from college, social media management wasn't even a career choice, yet it was one of the most in-demand fields. Like basically, if you have a marketing background or discipline, understanding how to create a set of tweets or understanding how to, create social media communities became very important in that time. So I think, there's going to be careers. So frankly, for those of you in high school today, by the time you graduate college, there's going to be new fields and careers that you may have, just kind of dabbled in, not really studied about necessarily in college. It just takes time for colleges and schools to catch up and create new syllabuses. So a lot of that, I think, will touch upon your core base learnings. And I think I'm going to go back to even learning about Kanban and Kaizen, right? Which was like the Kanban board is very interesting, which is just kind of, putting parts of your tasks in the to-do, doing, done fields and areas. And so that was borrowed from factory processes that were established between the decades of 1940s and 1960s. And it was applied to the field of software engineering. So I think there's a lot to be borrowed from different fields and disciplines. And I think there's so much pressure to pick a major that's frankly unnecessary, because it's not going to dictate the rest of your life.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. But talk to us though. So you were in college, and as you approached senior year of college, what was the thought process as to the real world? Had you identified the career? Did you figure it out afterwards? Like, what was going on late junior, senior year?
Yeah, so the year was 2009, my junior year, and senior year was 2010. So this was right at the throes of the financial crisis. Frankly, what happened was I remember being a junior in 2009, and career prospects did not look good. It was very, very difficult at the time. There was frankly a huge financial meltdown and economic crisis that was looming, not too dissimilar to what we're experiencing today with the coronavirus crisis. And so I think one thing was there was a lot of anxiety. Frankly, I remember feeling very anxious about my future. I remember feeling obviously the class of 2009, the graduates were having a lot of trouble finding jobs, and so prospects didn't look too good for even the class of 2010. I will say that what happened was class of 2008 had it much harder than 2009, had it much harder than class of 2010. And 2011 didn't have it that difficult, hard at all, because they were 3 years after the financial crisis. So I think for me, I was just heads down, just really focusing on, from an academic perspective, really trying to learn as much as I possibly could, really enjoying theater class, I remember. Wow. in 2009. That was something I really, really enjoyed. But I think, when I did graduate, I couldn't really find a job. Like, it took a really long time to even just get, my first, so junior year was really about getting some internships under the belt. And so there was a lot of cold emailing, trying to, convince some, organizations, companies. By the way, power of a cold email. Let me just tell you. Figure out the .com domain for a specific company you want to work at. Find out who the team manager or the HR representative is on LinkedIn. Send them a cold email. It does wonders. You'll be surprised at how well this works. So I remember our first interns, even at Tara, Jason Torion interned with us. Started his internships at I think he was 16 at the time. Now he's our first, he leads growth at Tara, but I just want to give you just to understand the power of a cold email. I mean, it's worked wonders even here. Like Jason and Tam both started their careers here. Now they're managers, but they started their careers here as interns, and they sent a cold email to me specifically stating why they wanted to work here. So I think that, as you identify the companies you want to work at, I really think cold emails go a long way. And so what I did was I sent out cold emails. It was very difficult to find cold emails at that time. Now it's gotten much easier. But just trying to find internships was very, very difficult during the crisis. But I did end up eventually, I did have 2 internships under my belt by the time I'd graduated. Even then, it was it took me a year to find a job, frankly. So what I did during that year was I just tried to find whatever I could, from a temporary contract roles. And let me tell you, temporary and contract roles was where I learned the most versus any kind of full-time roles that I had after. I think I remember there was one temporary role I had where I had to build these PR campaigns, and PR wasn't even my field. I was in finance. I wasn't in public relations, but building PR campaigns for Cisco, which is a big, network telecom company, allowed me to learn about consumer behavior with consumer products. And a lot of the multidisciplinary things I learned from these temp and contract roles very early on in my career actually did help quite a bit, even now in my role as CEO. So I think, over if I look at the last decade of my career, since I graduated at 19, the first few years were pretty tough, and it wasn't clear where I was going to end up from a careers perspective. But I think what I knew was if I kept gravitating towards areas and fields of interest, I would eventually know where I wanted to end up. And I remember I was so fed up with the job market. I created a jobs board with my co-founder. It was called Gradberry. And that was our first company, actually. So we were so frustrated with the with the job market, that we're like, oh, there should be a jobs board for fresh graduates. And we created Gradberry for that, and now there's like these amazing careers platforms like Way Up, internships.com, that are specifically helping like high school graduates and college graduates in the US find internships. So I think, building your portfolio as early as possible, building your resume as early as possible. Back then, it was all PDF paper resumes. Now you have these resumes and portfolios you can create, where you can create like your portfolio on, let's say if you're in art and design, you can create a portfolio for what you've created in Adobe Photoshop or in Sketch, and present like URLs or links to that portfolio. If you're interested in writing or literature, you could create your own blog and then link to articles on that blog, or even like freelance for other blogs as well. So I think there's like different areas of interest that you can pick up. And if you're interested in science or in biology, versus waiting until college graduation or waiting until you have a PhD to publish in a journal, I think you can easily start to download data sets. There's so many data sets available on just overall, like you can get data sets through APIs and create your own theses and your own hypothesis. I think there's just so much that the internet has opened up I think I'm someone who truly believes in that power. And I think no matter what field you're in, I think you can start to show elements of and areas of interest through even, you can literally go on GoDaddy and create your own domain. Like you could buy yourname.com and go on Squarespace, create your first website, and just kind of show your work and show your portfolio. So one of the things I remember about Jason and Tam was that they were already doing that in the very early days and actually linked to their portfolio when they sent those cold emails. So I think there's kind of going off topic and off track, but I think, creating those portfolios early, I think can really, really help. And at least for me, I remember some of the very early jobs that I had, I would always link to some of the work that had been done. I didn't have a personal portfolio, but I did link to, for example, university competitions, extracurricular activities that I had done. And I'd always try to link to real world examples of my work.
Amazing. So I think the gap, the kind of time period we're missing is, how did you get to the United States?
Oh, that was very hard. So what actually happened was, the first time I came to the US was 2011. So 1 year after 2011 or 2010. Okay, so I'm forgetting whether it was 2010 or 2011, but it was basically called the Hesselbein Leadership Academy. It's by the University of Pittsburgh. Every year they host this global summit where they invite anywhere about 50 students globally. You have to apply for it. You have to submit a letter of recommendation, and the university then picks you as their delegate. So in college, I was really involved in Model UN and just debate competitions, and just quite a few extracurriculars. So one area that I was really interested in was leadership conferences, basically. So right at the time of graduation, or right after I'd graduated, actually, I think, yes, it was 2010. It wasn't 2011. Yes, it was 2010. So I applied to the Hesselbein Global Summit and was selected. And then in July, I think right after graduation, I went to Pittsburgh for 4 days. And that was, I think, kind of an eye-opening experience. I got to experience the US for the first time. Pittsburgh was my first experience. And just in those 4 days, I think kind of learning about civic engagement, civic duty, global leadership, learning so much from the other students, frankly, and alumni from so many different universities who are, doing some amazing things now. Like, we still keep in touch. And so I think that was my first experience of the US, where I realized that if I wanted to, make a global impact, pursue some of my areas of interest, there could be a possibility of me moving to the US. At that time, it was just a possibility. Like, it just seemed impossible because I didn't have the funds, or I didn't go to college in the US. But just that leadership program, I think, kind of opened me up to the possibility. And then when we started our first company, the second time I visited was in 2012. So one of our investors funded the trip, and I'm so grateful to him. He's also one of our investors at Tara. He was one of our first investors, and I remember meeting him at a conference, and he's actually one of the investors at Dropbox, very early investor there. And so he funded the trip. I remember just kind of cut that check. And so I went to San Francisco for the first time. And I think then eventually, so our initial funding would come through competitions. So we applied to all of these different competitions, funding competitions through MIT and other universities, through Cartier. And so like, that's how we like got our first funds, like $10,000 and $15,000. It was like about $30,000, $40,000. That kind of funded the first areas of research for Tara. And that was, where I remember with like $200 under my belt, I just kind of decided to take the leap and go to Boston. And Boston was like the first city that I officially, like I remember staying there for a good 4 months and doing some of our work with that we were doing with MIT and a few other universities. What we were basically doing was trying to analyze GitHub profiles. So like developer data and looking at commits, pull requests, and just trying to understand if you could score or create profiles and create portfolios out of that data for those developers.
Amazing. So in terms of the startup, currently Tara, when did was that the one that was going on while you were in Boston, or did that come later on?
That came later on. So when we were in Boston, we were still working on Gradberry. And so I think Tara, we kind of went through, so with a startup, the way I would describe or define a startup is that it's a series of experiments that can fail or pass. And so what you're really doing is you're constantly testing theses and hypotheses. It's a scientific approach, really. I would say, it's biology 101, where you're basically testing against a series of theses, and frankly, you're failing majority of the time. And so what happened was we went through so many different pivots and iterations of the company and of the idea in general. It took us a couple of years to get to this state and this iteration, but Tara in earnest, we really, I think, started working on it right as soon as we got into 43North. So even before, when we applied for 43North, it was a little bit of a different idea, in fact. And then as we went through 43North, we started like going through the iterations and just kind of testing live with different companies that we tested. I remember in Western New York, and so a lot of these ideas around Tara really came from some of the customers that are still active, actually, that are still customers of ours on Tara. And so, we kind of went through these different phases when initially we were this contractor management platform. And what we realized was that the actual issue is in project management. Like, it's becoming more and more difficult to manage projects within a software interface. And so what happened was when we looked at the market, we realized that the software used to manage projects is fairly complex. It requires a ton of setup. It requires a lot of work. And that was when we realized, it's a much harder vision where you're kind of entering a space that is very competitive. But then what happened was we went from like 20 organizations that were using the contractor management platform to now 5,000 plus organizations in like 8 months. And I think what we did was we really focused on keeping the platform simple, easy to use, like anyone can go onto Tara and start a project. And that's why we have now thousands of students using it too, because the fundamental principle is that you're basically organizing your work into sprints, which is like weekly sprints. And you're kind of just like using it to focus on delivery. Like, how do we deliver the most amount of work in a remote environment? And so what happened was with the remote move, more and more people required easy, simple project management software to get up, off the ground and hit the ground running. And that was, what essentially happened with us, which was as more and more teams and organizations went remote, they were switching from using Jira and other complex types of PM software to using us.
Amazing. So COVID has certainly provided an opportunity for Tara.
Yeah, significant one. Yeah.
Unreal. So any parting words? Actually, one last topic, because I'm sure you'll have thoughts, is on the mentorship side, right? A lot of these students may have ideas, right? Or be dabbling with something, or may have something come up that they want to think about from a business perspective in the coming years. From a mentorship standpoint, talk to the importance of leaning on people outside of your network, or you touched on cold calling, but finding folks that can help you as you start to run with an idea.
So I think, I think I'll place it in order of importance. So frankly, I think the first mentors for any startup or any business idea are customers. So actual users of the product. So Potterific, let's take the Potterific Harry Potter community. I didn't ask for mentorship. I literally was just using Google to figure out how to code up like the first page on Potterific in MSN groups at the time in HTML and just push it forward, right? And so I remember my first user, I think he was from Bulgaria. It was a Harry Potter fan, and he was kind of giving feedback, like, and I found out that the entrance exams that I created were too difficult for people to actually join the community and get any kind of, so that was a lesson in onboarding, right? Like, the first levels of onboarding were very, very hard. I remember my the comic book idea I had. Let's go back to high school and kind of talk through that. One of the things I realized was people were like, there's no school library. So like you're looking at a microcosm, right? Like the small select group of your users or your customers, if they are school students, for example, those are frankly your first mentors. Like they are the ones that will give you the most feedback. Another business idea I remember that we ran with in college that we worked. So I was just kind of helping the main team. I remember there were like two founders-ish that had come up with this idea called book swap. College textbooks, even high school textbooks, way too expensive. Like they're just exorbitantly expensive, right? And so we kind of came up with this idea of swapping books. And then eventually I found out there's like this giant company that exists. It's called Chegg, that does this on a national level. But the idea you just kind of start small, right? Which is kind of created this Excel spreadsheet with all of the textbooks that people wanted to kind of sell to the next class. So it was like seniors selling to juniors, juniors selling to sophomores, sophomores selling to freshmen. And we kind of started to create this macro in Excel. And again, those individual students gave us the feedback that, you shouldn't only be able, why is this only open to the business school? It should also be open to College of Engineering, because the engineering school is also buying business textbooks. So I think the first steps beyond, trying to find some fancy mentors that have, fancy universities or fancy company names attached to them, which I think comes eventually. But I really believe the best mentorship comes from the first users or the first customers of your product. They will be the ones that will guide you and tell you like what is difficult about your product, where is it hard to use or hard to implement. Let's take a lemonade stand, for example. Your mentors, who are your people that are drinking the lemonade, will tell you if it's too sweet or too salty or too sour. And so I think so much of the mentorship comes from your first users, and I think you need to launch early and often. So don't worry or be too scared that a product isn't complete before launching it to your first set of customers. I'll give you an example. At Tara as well, even at this stage, right? April 2020 was when we launched our first official version that is open to all users. Like anyone can come in and sign up. We were terrified. We thought we launched April 30th, and we were initially planning on doing it in June. But we decided, you know what, even though the product isn't complete, it's not finished, there's still tons of bugs in it, let's just launch it and see what happens. And we launched it, and we went from like 100 users to 3,000 in like 7 days. Because everyone was like, oh, I want to use this. And they were using it, and they're like, yeah, fine, it's buggy, but it doesn't matter, we'll fix the bugs. And so every week then we started fixing all the bugs. So I just want you to know that no matter what stage you are in your life, whether you're 14, 15, 16, 12, 25, 35, it's always scary to launch something into the world. And at any stage of life. And so launching early and often and getting feedback from your mentors who are your first users is really important, and they'll guide you as to where to go. I mean, Colleen, I'm sure you remember, right, when we were going through 43 North, it was so hard to convince even one company to use this thing. Do you remember? Like,
Yes.
we literally used to go after company after company. Colleen and her team, Lauren, everyone would painstakingly make these introductions. And imagine, like, when we shifted our focus into just working on the product and improving that and finding a market where people were really having true difficulty and true issues, God, we went from like 20 companies to, you know, I think by end of year we'll be at 10,000. Right now we're at 7,000 in like a matter of a few months, and without even meeting any of those companies face to face or doing introductions or anything. So I think it's really interesting how if you just kind of introduce something to the world, make it open, make it accessible, and not even to the world, but even to your neighborhood, to your class, to your, you know, I feel like if you go back to that microcosm and just get feedback, there's so much magic that can happen.
Amazing. So if I'm well aware of the time, any parting words, remembering these are, you know, juniors, seniors in high school, you know, have college on the horizon, if that's for them. Any kind of final remarks that you would advise them of?
I think right now, probably one of the hardest things is obviously remote learning and having to learn on a, you know, in a distributed way, and not, you know, getting to like kind of rub shoulders with your classmates. I think one advantage to this that I can tell that you guys have over any generation that has ever existed in the history of the universe is that you are literally learning how to be remote team from day one. I didn't know how to set up a Google Calendar invite, and I'm pretty sure several of you already have calendars kind of set up with your syllabi, classes, and etc. I didn't know how to use conferencing software when I graduated from college. Yet you guys are in high school and already using video conferencing software. You already know what the word mute means, and like, you know, what it means to be on mute versus, and you're already, I mean, the things you guys are learning, it's immense. And I think that is something you should be so proud of. I'm sure there's a ton of anxiety and difficulty at this stage that, you know, I'm sure you guys are going through, but let me tell you, like, the stuff you guys are learning and what you're going to come up with in the next few years when you graduate is going to be astounding. And I think your generation will push the boundaries of work forward to an extent that I think none of us have ever seen. So I'm excited for what you guys are going to create and build in the next few years.
Amazing, Iba. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.